So, hello everyone, and welcome. I am Christiana Ellis,
And I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we are talking about Survivor. Specifically, we are talking about. Why is my. There we go. We are talking about episode 4 of Survivor season 39, Island of the Idols. And I think, all things considered, although not all of our I don't know, complaints maybe seems too strong. All of our unanswered questions about last week were not all answered, but on the whole, I feel like this was a more satisfying episode than the last one.
Yes. I feel like they did a better job of, editing it to where it was still ambiguous as to what was going to happen. But still giving us enough of the storylines that we get why it went down the way that it did.
Right.
Whether we agree or disagree, we at least know how they got there.
Yeah, and it seems like it was a very chaotic situation.
Right. Well, and that's why I'm giving them credit, because it was more chaotic this week, it felt like. But I felt like we, as the audience, understood better everyone's motivations.
Yeah.
And why this has ended up being what they chose.
Right, as opposed to last week where we had a bunch of people specifically explain why they would not want to do something, and then with no connecting dots in between, them doing the exact thing that they said they weren't going to do.
Right.
So, yeah. I think the other thing that we get a little bit more information on, which is to say that Karishma, although certainly we can understand the human emotional reasons why she might have been shutting down a little bit, it might be that there is a little bit of a spiraling behavior. Like if she was already a little bit passive and not inclined to help as much at camp and not clicking with everybody, and that the more that happened, the more that she felt excluded, the more that she withdrew, the more she seemed like an outsider to everyone else, and it just kind of became a vicious cycle. And it seems in this episode like that might have been at least part of what was going on there.
Yes.
Yeah. So, in the beginning of the episode, though, we have the rest of the group trying to manage her in what felt like a very condescending way. Like, do you understand what happened? That sort of thing. When
they managed her that way the entire episode, I would say. I mean, it was just hyper focused right then. But the entire theme of the episode is you're going to do what we want because you have no choice.
Right. But so, like, all the more reason, though, that it felt condescending for them to try to, like, approach the whole thing like, you might be confused about what happened this time. And she's like, no, it was obvious to me from the beginning that you didn't care about me, and that's why you were willing to risk me going home in order to flush Vince's idol. Yeah, it's all pretty clear. Like, she didn't say that to them, but that's certainly what she was actually thinking. So,
and what they were... And it almost felt like they were setting the table for what they eventually did later, which is basically like, well, you were saved this time by us. Like, you are the vote. And that's why we were willing to have you be the other person if Vince had used his idol. So if you, in the future, would like to not be voted out, like, just so you know, like, we may come to you and say, you need to do exactly what we want. Like, it wasn't explicit, but it felt like that's why they were so condescending there, is they wanted to put her in her place so that if they decided they didn't want to use her, which you could even see in the opening scene, like, I think Missy was already even talking about that. Of like, well, we can get rid of her whenever we want because she sucks, is basically what she said. So why wouldn't I just want to keep using her for right now? Because she's indebted to us because she has no other way out. I mean, Missy had that laid out from the beginning. And again, she did execute it to some degree. I mean, I think we can debate whether this was right or wrong. But,
I was frustrated with Missy because although she's certainly playing in an active way, I don't have confidence that it's all intentional, specifically because she's still talking about this idea of the Girls' Alliance, but none of the moves she's making actually serve that.
Right.
So it's one thing if she doesn't actually care about it and that's just her way of working the other girls, but that's not what she says to the camera.
Well, yeah, and I think that that's where, like, why I think that it's, her character and her character, she was actually one of the most interesting threads of this entire,
Yeah.
episode, because of exactly what you're talking about there. Like, it felt genuine that she does want to find a way to make that work, but it's trumped by the fact that she would just rather do stuff.
Yeah.
Which
is fine, right? Like,
right.
That's allowed.
Right. So she's genuine in, like, if I could serve this purpose, then I would want to do that. So that's why at the beginning she's talking about, like, well, yeah, because, like, Karishma will have to come back and do what we want, and well, that's why Dean's a great target, because then that puts Chelsea in the same position. Like, even though she's going to be mad,
oh, I lost you there.
She has to come back to us because she lost Dean.
Even though she's going to be mad.
I was saying, and so she almost starts formulating. Right, she's going to come back to us because she's lost Dean. So this is almost like her strategy is to create people who have to be in the alliance that she wants because she has punished them in some way, and so just all these things swirling around in her head. And I think what makes her interesting, though, is that, like, once she's, like, laid her mind to it, like, she's effective. It's just whether or not she's effective pointing in the right direction that I kind of question.
Yeah.
Because there seem to be too many different motivations that you can't figure out the hierarchy, and then eventually, like, just something happens, and she's clearly getting them to do those things. She was determined from the beginning to break up Dean and Chelsea. When it became obvious that, like, Dean was going to be a little bit of a rocky road, even with Aaron's, like, endorsement of it, then she flipped right to Chelsea, and she got him to do it eventually.
Yeah. Well,
even though they were still withholding, like, they weren't all on board with that either.
Right.
But she still got him to do it.
Like, it's interesting because on the one hand, I want to give her a lot of credit that she does seem to be playing proactively in a way that, she's been attracting maybe a little bit of attention about being sort of very assertive in her strategy. But overall, nobody's really talked about taking her out as a result yet. She has certainly been controlling the voting. She's accomplishing the things she sets out to do for the most part. She's adaptable. So there are a lot of good things about what she's doing, but it's undermined a little bit just by the fact that, like, sometimes what she's telling us in these confessionals doesn't always line up with what we actually see her do with everybody else.
Right, and that's why what I was saying is what makes I think what is interesting about her to me is that it seems that there are conflicting, like, it's not, the reason to me it feels like it's not lining up is that she has conflicting motivations, and we're not sure, and I don't know that she's sure the hierarchy of how to make the decisions. And so they don't necessarily align with anything. Like, they just sort of, here are a bunch of ideas I have, and this is the one that's going to work, so I'm going to go forward with this, even though it could be counter to something else, another idea that she had that we heard her talk about.
Right. Well, maybe her approach here is really just a matter of, let's have several irons in the fire, so to speak, and proceed with whichever one seems to be most effective in the moment. Like, it may be that we, through the process of the editing, are kind of fixating on this idea of the Girls' Alliance, whereas she's really maybe not as attached to it as we were led to believe, and it's more a matter of that's one way things could go, but if she's finding that difficult because Karishma is a lead balloon for that strategy, and and then Chelsea is aligning with Dean and making those votes hard, like, well, maybe that's the issue, right? Like, she's just saying that, like, she is not emotionally attached to that approach necessarily, and she is just basically going to say, well, I like that idea in concept, But if that's going to start hurting my game if by pushing it, I'm going to do the more expedient thing for me. And
Right.
so maybe that's what's going on there. You know, so it could be that there is really no conflict except just that, you know, uh, through what we have seen, it might suggest there's more attachment to that particular plan. But her actual gameplay doesn't seem to be lining up with that. So maybe that was all just kind of an illusion to begin with, or
Right.
one possible option.
Right. It could be that. It could definitely be that, where it's like, oh, this is a thing that would be cool, and also helps me. Like my real motivation is I want to bring Karishma back to us
Mm-hmm.
because I have her indebted, and we have her kind of, behind the eight ball here.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can still frame it around this girls' alliance, then maybe it doesn't feel so bad to her. Or the other thing could be, to your point of the having a lot of irons in the fire. It could be that, but more chaotic in her own mind.
Mm-hmm.
Where she's not thinking of it logically, like here are all my irons in the fire. It's when I'm in front of one iron, that's the one I do have a lot of irons in the fire, but whichever one I'm in front of is the one I'm thinking about and talking about and worried
Mm-hmm.
about.
Yeah.
But then when that one is no longer whatever happens to an iron in the fire when you're done with it, um, she moves to the next one, and so that one's forgotten. So it could be I could see it either of those ways, and that's why I think she's kind of a fascinating character
Yeah.
because we're not really sure what drives it. Like, is it as logical as what you're saying? Is that she's not really emotionally attached to any of these ideas?
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, real quick here.
Okay. All right. So, yeah. Well, are you back?
Sorry, just got
Okay.
a
Sure.
quick dinner question interruption. So
No worries. So yeah, but I mean, I think we're maybe on the same page there. I feel like that I was more inclined to feel negatively towards her last week, partly just because I think I was kind of identifying more, relating more with Karishma's struggle last week, whereas in this week it seems more like, um, I can certainly relate to Karishma's issues, but that she is being more passive and not necessarily managing the situation she's in from a gameplay perspective. Like,
yeah,
she's in a tough spot, but she's also not really doing the things that would get her out of it.
yeah, absolutely. I agree with you there. Like I wouldn't have been sad to see her go. I liked Chelsea better. Um,
Mm,
what I also think helped us this week from the Missy perspective is that we got to see more. Like it goes back to our same criticism of like what happened last time. Like we got to see the moment when she said, I've got to abandon this Dean thing because it's getting too hard,
mm-hmm,
but I still want to break them two up. So here's what I'm going to create.
mm-hmm,
And you get to see that it still wasn't like a super smooth transition. Like Elizabeth originally didn't want to do that either.
right.
But she was, so we didn't see her eventually persuade them over, but we saw the process that she went through, which we didn't see last time, which left us feeling really odd about her.
Mm-hmm,
Whereas this time, like, we're like, okay, I don't agree necessarily that was so
mm-hmm,
necessary to break them two up. Like, you just felt
right.
like you needed to do it. But at least I get where you're coming from now.
Mm-hmm,
I'm watching this progress, which is what we were unsettled with last week. And
right.
so I think we're
Because,
giving her a lot more
yeah.
credit because we see a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree completely because what we were missing last week was that transition. We get a confessional where we are shown her telling us that she cares about this all girls alliance, but then her gameplay doesn't reflect that. And so now we're getting to see more of what's the thought process that goes from one strategy to the next.
Yeah.
So in any event, we started off with Karishma feeling kind of depressed about her situation, which is understandable. It's not a good situation to be in.
No.
But, like one of the things that several people said is that she doesn't help much around camp. she just kind of is acting depressed all the time, which it's like we can understand why that would be, but it's also exactly the sort of thing that doesn't dig yourself out of the hole that you're in. You know, if they're treating you as expendable, you have to show that you're not in some way, right? And we didn't really, you know, we see her saying, I know something has to change, but then we don't really see her doing anything to change it. And again, it's like I can sympathize. That's hard, but that doesn't mean she, you know, it's that doesn't mean she gets to win Survivor.
Right.
Yeah. Jason says he understands how she feels because, you know, he was kind of in that boat, but he's a good example of someone who was kind of on the outs like that, but then did do something about it and now isn't anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, and it's funny because he's even talking about that at this point, and then he goes and has like a really strong challenge performance, to just really cement himself like back in, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
Yeah. So in the meantime, here's the bit where we have Chelsea and Dean doing that thing where two people are extremely flirty and somehow think that they're being all smooth and subtle about it when everyone else is just rolling their eyes.
yes,
So that's, I think everyone's probably been through that experience at some point. But we have Chelsea saying she's not here for a showmance, and you know she's not here to do that. But then titters every time Dean says something and smiles when he walks by and sleeps next to him in the shelter, and yeah. So I mean, so we can, even if we liked Chelsea and thought, like she could have had some more potential, it's also true that this is one of the classic ways that people get voted out at this stage of the game, right? It's like, what's the number one way? Just don't get along with everybody. Number two way, don't contribute anything at camp or in challenges. Number three, be in a power couple. Like, those are the three things that get people voted out in the first half of the game.
Yes.
Yeah. In any event, we have, at this point, we still have Missy mentioning the Girls Alliance, but she seems like she's working with Aaron more than anyone else. There's discussion of maybe getting rid of Dean. She talks about, we kind of covered this already. She's a little frustrated with Karishma, but, is willing to say, but, as long as she's here, she's going to vote for who we say to. So that's useful.
Yeah. And I did like that we also got, this is actually another good point here, in just, again, seeing more of her confessionals and, like, more of her motivations. Mm-hmm. We get a glimpse as to why she and Aaron are close. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they like both came out of military academies and they both are, African American. Like, so she's like, we're seeing that there's a reason that the two of them have bonded naturally that we didn't necessarily see before. Like, it seemed before, because all we had seen from Aaron before, and even still in this one, like, he's kind of, it's not really hot-headed. He's just like very quickly decisive, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think
it's
part of
softer than a hothead, you know. But,
well, it was a snap judgment problem. It was the school colors problem last time, in the sense that when I say school colors, what I just mean in terms of it's like picking teams, because last week we are led to understand Missy is all about the All Girls Alliance. Aaron is like the antithesis of that. He is the opposite side of that whole concept.
Right.
So it felt weird that they wouldn't, like, that they would be chummy, right? Like, it seemed strange in that context, but I think what we're seeing now, looking backwards.
Exactly. Like, it felt like last week, like she had one plan and he had another, and then when the episode ended, she had done exactly what he wanted.
Right.
And that he had, like, kind of, and we didn't understand how he, like, got over her, but now we understand, like, they are more synergistic than we were led to believe, and they are actually friends, and they do actually plan together, and they talk about things. Yeah. And we're given that, and so again, we can't keep bagging on last week's, but it really was a terrible episode, like from a communication standpoint, like.
Oh,
This was so much smoother.
that just reminds me, I want to just bring up something that I really don't have any inside information on, but it was something that it was like, it's practically a conspiracy theory that I saw mentioned on Twitter, and I have no confirmation or anything of this, but it honestly feels pretty plausible. And that is the idea that the people who go to Island of the Idols are not allowed to tell the truth about what's there.
That's interesting.
I certainly can't, I mean, other than just as a general rule, they usually don't do stuff like that. It seems very in line with everything we've seen. And we can understand why they would want that. They want to have people be surprised every time they go.
Right. Honestly, in this episode, it would make even more sense because of how, like, bizarre Nora's lie is.
It's, well, we'll talk more about that, but I think that, the idea that,
like, her conversation feels more like, you have to lie. You cannot tell the truth. Here is the only things you can say about this.
Right, yeah.
Here's all that you're allowed to talk about. And so she literally, as opposed to the other ones who were a little bit more clever about, like, just being dismissive of what happened, like, it sounded like I'm really starting to buy into this. Like, it's almost like she told them everything she possibly was allowed to tell them, and then just lied about the things she wasn't, and it made it such a weird story.
Yeah.
Well, she told them what the challenge was going to look like. She told them that she would get an advantage, that she would be there were a lot of parts to what she said that almost felt like, here's the checklist of what you're allowed to tell them.
Right. Yeah. So my guess would be that if there is such a rule in place, it would probably be limited to, you're not allowed to say that there's anybody else there, much less who it is. Right. That would, if there's a rule, I'm sure I would guess that that's what it is. Like, so if, you could say that there is possibility to get some sort of advantage, but you have to make up something else. And if that's true, like, I kind of get it, but it's also a little bit disappointing because it forces people to have to lie. And that's a little frustrating to put that on someone, Like, because it's one thing to say that lies happen all the time in the game, you have to be able to do it. And it's not like they don't have plausible stories they can tell. But it starts to feel more plausible when you start thinking about the frustration of, why didn't we get to hear what Vince said? Maybe because it was awkward. Because he was really struggling to say, well, I don't know what to say if I can't say what really happened.
Yeah.
And, so who knows? Like, for all we know, he did tell them, but he wasn't supposed to. And it turned into a whole thing where the producers had to intervene, and that's why we didn't see it. Like, it's hard to say, but it's a surprising omission from last week. And so, like I said, this is all a conspiracy theory. I don't have any actual inside information to back that up. I mostly just saw on Twitter someone who seemed pretty convinced that was what was true, and it just occurred to me that it sounded plausible to me.
Yeah. And most everything I read on Twitter is pretty much usually true, so.
Well, I just wanted to put it all in the proper context.
No, I know, I'm joking. I'm joking. Just like with anything, like, it could be accurate, it could be completely falsified. Like, we have no way of knowing. There is a plausible belief of that's something that could be going on. It would make it would explain and make sense of some of the things that we like again, Nora's sort of bizarre storytelling, like the omission of Vince's. Like, every time the second person has come back, it's been a little bit odder.
Yeah, yeah. It's increasingly strange because in this one, we even got a whole bit with Kelly talking about how it's gonna be a thing when someone else comes back, and then we see nothing.
well, yeah, like Kelly's whole thing is like, this is going to be interesting because I'm hoping that whoever it is, like, actually draws me closer to them because we'll have a shared secret.
Right.
Which, again, to your point, like, she knew it would be a shared secret from the outset, you know,
Right.
as opposed to we would have a shared story and they might
She
actually
didn't
blow
seem.
up.
Yeah, she didn't seem worried about what if they come back and just blow up the fact that I lied. She didn't seem worried about that.
Right.
And that makes me wonder if, like, maybe she's not worried because she knows it's against the rules for someone to do that.
Right. And she did have a phenomenal, like, confessional, though, where she was like, I mean, this is just a terrible lie.
Yeah. Well,
But-
that's what I was going to say, like, when we were going to get to it. But I suspect Nora, in her position, was going to be forced to lie regardless, because there's no other way that they would let her be the caller if all that they get out of it is that, you know what I mean? It's like if she just laid it straight out, like, you guys need to pick me as caller so that I can get an idol. Like, obviously she doesn't want to tell them that. That's not going to get her anywhere. So she was going to have to lie anyway, about some pieces of it at least. And the problem ultimately is that she really just didn't think her lie through very carefully. She didn't apply, like, what questions might they ask me about this and what are the answers? But then again, that's kind of exactly what Rob and Sandra said about her when she left, is this, like, she just jumped right into it. She didn't even ask any questions. Like, we tried to lead her to the idea that she could negotiate a little bit, and she just, nope, she was into it all the way. She jumped in with both feet without looking, really. And it's like...
The fact that Sandra was like, this is really risky. Are you sure you don't want to think about it?
Mm-hmm.
In a very, like, leading tone.
Yeah.
And she was like, nope, I'm in.
Yeah.
No, but you want to? No, I'm in. No, I am in. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. On your way.
Dear people who are only on the show because you know a lot about Survivor, I don't want to listen to what you have to say.
This sounds fun to me. Like, I'm just
Yeah.
going to go do it.
Which, it's like, again, it's like she jumps in, she's bold, but it's definitely, it's that old adage of look before you leap, right? And it's just, her lie bears out that thought process, which is that she just didn't really think about it very carefully. And she was utterly unprepared for them to challenge any aspect of her silly lie.
Right, and that's what, I mean, Rob hit that, like, dead on in, like, his confessional, and we know this one was actually after he spoke to her, since it was direct to the camera,
Mm-hmm.
unlike last week with the weird voiceover.
Yeah.
But where he even says, he's like, she's in her own world, like, it's,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's exactly what happened, is, like, she sees this, and she's like, her risk-reward calculation of, wait, all I have to do is tell people to make me the caller? Like, I can do that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to convince them to make me the caller. And Rob's sitting there being like, no one is going to want you to be the caller. I've known you for half an hour.
Yeah.
And you're a terrible communicator. Like, this is not a good idea for you. And she's just like, no, this is going to be easy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why when they try to back her off, like, her calculation of risk versus reward was so friggin' skewed
Yeah.
that it didn't. She didn't even think to back off of it,
Well, no, she just, like, once the idea was floated, she just made the decision immediately, and then it was just like head down, full steam ahead. Nothing was gonna change her mind.
Right.
And
it was almost like literally the opposite of what happened with Elizabeth when she went there,
Mm-hmm.
and she was hesitant at first, and they almost, like, goaded her into the challenge because that was her lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Was to be goaded into, like, playing up her Olympian thing and, like, challenging Rob and, like, don't you want to beat the best? Like, they didn't say it all like that, but they kind of.
Well, like, they got her to that point, but only because she was hesitant, right?
Right.
So it was, but
Right, they worked her the other way.
right. Whereas, it's, yeah. So, and this whole lesson was about being persuasive, but it ended up them just realizing that's not the lesson that she needs to learn here.
She certainly was not persuasive.
No. So I mean,
Terrible lie to
let's
the
come
point
back
where
to
they
that,
didn't
but
even care. Yeah.
we'll come back to that because I definitely have more to say about it. But in the meantime,
Okay.
let's just jump back to at Vokai. We have Jamal feeling a little paranoid. You know, of course, he was one of the people left on the outside of the last vote for that tribe, so feeling like he needs to protect himself a little bit, and so he decides to do some idol hunting, and it seems like he handles it really well. Like he seems to, at least from whatever we could see. Of course, we didn't see, like for all we know, if we saw a shot of everyone out on the raft, you know, we see it from a distance, and if we cut to them actually talking in the raft, they're going to be saying like, "It's a little weird that Jamal didn't want to come out with us, right?" Like for all we know, that was true. But at least as presented, it seemed like he had everybody, you know, believing his reason for not being with them, which gave him the opportunity to go idol hunting. And good for him, he found one.
Yep.
Yeah. I liked that. I liked what he had to say about, how he's had some life lessons that have taught him to be, not too, be observant. Don't go too fast. Take things in stride. Don't rush into things. Pay attention to what you're doing. And I liked all of that. And I also think it's very cool that the producers have started really leaning into the idea that hidden immunity idols, real ones, look like something someone could make as a fake.
Right.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Just because it makes, the idea of making a fake one something that's much more plausible if that's what the real ones look like, as opposed to it's just a stick.
We got to that. Not that particular one, but we did get to revisit Eric.
Yeah, yeah. So in the meantime, this is where we do have the whole bit about the boat comes along, and there wasn't previously a random draw, so now it's like they're changing it up. It still feels like the whole random selection thing was always sort of a half measure to begin with, and this feels like they're workshopping it.
Right. Like you can choose someone or you can draw.
Mm-hmm.
And and they're sort of, I mean, their groupthink decision here was a little odd of like, well, if someone is willing to volunteer, like we'll agree to
let them go.
send them, which was weird,
I don't think so, because the issue is that they have to do it unanimously, and if they're trying to still be, group identity, to agree unanimously to send someone who doesn't want to go feels disruptive. It feels like a punishment.
Yeah.
That's not what they're wanting to do. So I think what they're trying to say is, if someone wants to go, we can do that. Otherwise, let's just do it randomly so it doesn't feel like someone's getting punished by the rest of the tribe.
Right. And what I guess where I forgot is that, because I was coming at it from a different angle. Like I was thinking of this not as a punishment, as a reward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I was like weird. Like, well, if someone wants to accept this reward, like you're just going to send it. But then I forget that they don't know that this is a potential reward, because their only perception of it is what Kelly came back and told them.
Which was pretty unimpressive. Like that, there's theoretically a chance, but like I didn't even get to play.
Right. I didn't do anything. I just went. It was basically like Exile Island with an option to like maybe you have a gambling option.
Right. Yeah. And so the thing is that like if there were multiple people who wanted to go, then that's a separate question. You have a different discussion at that point, right? But if the issue is that nobody wants to go, then that's where you start saying, well, okay, if there's even one person who does want to volunteer, then I think we're probably all okay doing that. Otherwise, we do it randomly. But, Nora, in the first instance, this episode of what becomes the theme is, is like, well, shoot, I'll go. I want to go. And she's a curious person. She wants to do and see all the things, which is not necessarily a bad trait in general.
No, I am more empathetic to her after this episode.
Hmm.
Like, I still get, I don't think I still think she would be annoying to me, and I think
Hmm.
that they have not, like, mis-edited her in any way.
Yeah.
But I feel there's just a little bit more of a genuineness that I see in, like, in this enthusiasm and this just myopic view of the world, and not even like in a narcissistic way.
Right.
Like, sorry to use all those big, like, I'm not trying, like, it's it doesn't feel like she only sees the world through her own eyes, like, so narrowly, because she has, like, this huge ego.
Hmm.
It's just like this weird trait of hers that she
Yeah.
just has. She
She
just doesn't.
she's
And
just
I
a
think Rob
little.
hit it really well. He's like, she is actually perceptive, but there's, like, this thing missing where, like, her perception doesn't equate with reality. Like she sees what's going on, but, like, her decisions on, like, what they mean are
Mhm.
wrong. You
Yeah.
know, like,
Well, and
she's a Nora.
yeah,
Yeah.
she's just out of sync with most people, right? She's kind of
Mhm.
doing her own thing, but she's just on a slightly different wavelength from everybody else, and it just doesn't mesh up perfectly. You know, it's a dumb reference, but it makes me think of this old Star Trek: The Next Generation episode where Geordi and Ensign Ro were in a transporter accident, just like always happens, um, and they ended up, out of phase with the rest of the universe. And what that meant is that they were like, ghosts to everybody else. Like they were walking around and could see and hear everybody else, but nobody else could see them, and they could go through walls and stuff like that. And then what I'm just thinking with her is that, it's like she's just a little bit of out of phase. She can obviously hear and see what everyone says. They can hear and see what she says, but it doesn't line up perfectly. What
Right.
she says doesn't come across the way she means it, and she doesn't understand what other people are saying the way they mean it. And that's always a struggle. It's called being a human being. Nobody completely understands other people. It's like it's a struggle for everyone, but she's maybe just a little bit more out of sync with the group, and that is causing some struggles for her.
Right. Yeah, like, all of us ultimately only see the world through our own
Hmm.
eyes. That is just, like you said, part of being a human being.
Right.
But yes, she is a little bit more, has a little bit more blinders on to, like, her own interests,
Hmm.
and just, like, what she gets enthusiastic about. And, like, you can even just, you saw it there, you see it in when she's actually trying to be the caller.
Yeah. Well, like,
And that's even where you, like, even, like, thing again, like, it's not an ego thing, but, like, again, it's the self-centeredness part of it. Like, she only perceives how to give them directions in relation to her.
hmm, yeah.
Like that right there, like, that shows, like, her focus on herself.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's not like
So,
it's not a like a moral failing. It's just a communication failing, right? It's
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So what we see though at this point is that she wants to go. She's willing to do it, and she wants to put herself out there and volunteer for things and strike out. And in some ways, that's she's the one that's not afraid to go do things, and so that's good in some ways. But where it's not as good are where, like when they're challenging her on the lie later, she is genuinely flummoxed because from her perspective, she thinks she would be a great caller, and she is honestly shocked that anyone would even question that. I think she agreed so quickly because she thought it was like a slam dunk.
Right.
I'm the perfect choice to be caller. Surely they'll see that, so this will be easy.
Yeah, and I think one of her descriptions as to why was like, well, I'm always talking. I'm always loud and talking.
Yeah,
So
I've got a
people,
big voice. Yeah.
yeah, I have a big voice. Yeah, like, I'll be a great caller. Yeah.
I think she's thinking of it exclusively from the perspective of I can yell out my instructions real loud, which is, it is a significant part of it. You do have to be able to do that. But communicating clearly is the other half. You really need both pieces, and that's where she struggles. But so in any event, the editing, like, I certainly agree. I think we're on the same page that the editing is not adding traits to her that aren't really there, but it's also certainly not a kind edit. And I'm thinking in particular of the bit where she sees the watermelon and kind of makes a screaming sound, and it cuts to a flock of birds flying away. Like she scared away the birds with her noise that she made. I mean,
that was funny though.
it was funny, but it was not a nice joke. You know what I mean?
No, but it was led into so well because Rob's being like so like, he's like, so have you been eating? Yep. Yeah. Have you had any watermelon? Where do you find the watermelon?
I know the idea that
that she just didn't know there was water.
She assumed he meant like, oh no, didn't you know? Like there's the special trick to finding the watermelon here in Fiji.
So that just like it just leaned into that. I mean, it was funny.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was funny. I laughed.
But you're right. It's not a nice joke.
Yeah, it was just one of those things that when we talk about how the producers do build narratives with the editing, that's the sort of thing they do, right? It's just the same like when they have someone talking about a scheme and then they cut to a snake or a spider or something like that, right? It's the same. It's the same thing.
Well, yeah, and I think Missy got the shark edit.
Oh, yeah.
Right before her decision to go for Chelsea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Shark's probably a more, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a different. I think if I were going to get one or the other,
like she was very direct with what she wanted to do, but I thought it was an appropriate edit. Like she wanted prey.
I agree. Yeah. I think it's an apt one for how she's playing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when Dean came off the table, she went for something else.
I thought one of the things that I thought was really interesting, though, with this little sequence where we get the montage of clips from previous episodes and talking about persuading people, and I thought it was really interesting for Rob to specifically bring up that whole controversial promise to Lex about, save Amber if you can, that he eventually broke. But for him to bring that up as an example of something where he persuaded someone to do something in the moment, but then didn't get Lex's vote at the end. So it's a question of like, well, so do you consider that a success story or not? Right? And I thought it was interesting to have brought up both sides of that sort of pivotal moment, right?
Yeah, I think I was wondering if some of this was, while it was also, while it was a relevant education piece for this episode, mm-hmm. whether some of it was just like cathartic or apologetic from Rob, like just a way to go on the record that like he did this and it didn't work out for him. I don't know.
I'm not sure about that, only just because he's certainly spoken on the subject many times before now.
Has he? Okay. I haven't seen that as much then. The other thing I thought was interesting, though, was the fact that they did use those girls tricking Eric, which, yes, they did a good job, but, like, he was such an easy target. I get it makes a great example, and it's also fun for the episode to like revisit that.
I frankly have pretty mixed feelings about using any clips from previous seasons at all. I'm not sure I really like that. I mean, I guess I understand what purpose they're trying to serve with them, but frankly, that's not what I want. I would rather they not do that.
Yeah. Because I think that I get probably a little bit of what I was experiencing too, where it's like, again, it was like conflicted of, yeah, it was funny to relive that. Yes, they were persuasive. They certainly did a number on him.
Yeah.
And they used persuasion techniques like that you could illustrate, and it's a great textbook example because it was so friggin' easy for them that you could draw a very clear delineation of here's what they said and here's what he did.
Well, I wonder if it might have had to be the producers just reacting to, they didn't put any, rules on Rob about what he could say in trying to teach this lesson. And if Rob's instinct was to want to go to all of these specific examples, then they're feeling like, yeah. Well, why not show it? Certainly they have access to the clips, but also they have to recognize it's like, well, for some of those, it's been a while and people might not really remember clearly, or maybe they never saw that season and, won't get the reference without a little bit more information. And so, I was kind of ambivalent about it, but I could see that maybe being why.
Yeah, I think ultimately if it just lived in this episode and in how Rob was describing this particular lesson, it's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. To your point, like if this starts to become a thing where they start dragging up a bunch of old episodes to like teach the lessons, mm-hmm. that could get a little weird, because it's not, because some of it was like, it was funny seeing Eric kind of get just like completely bulldozed by those girls. It was also an interesting reminder, like, yes, I remember when Yul, like, from the other way, like, bullied mm-hmm. from the idol side of it because of the way the idol worked.
Yeah.
But I forgot about how good he was at it. Like, mm-hmm. he just, the undertone that was there of, like, you're going to do what I want, mm-hmm. or you're going to go home without it ever feeling like an overt threat.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of forgot how well he walked that line. And
he was very cool.
He was really good. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was my favorite of the clips they showed, just because I hadn't thought about it. And, not like I think about all these other issues.
Like, kind of like tossing the idol in his hands. And he's just like, yeah, I mean, I got this thing, man. It's just like.
Well, like, it was so effective that they changed the rules.
Yes, he literally changed the rules. So, anyway.
Yeah. So, in any event, as you mentioned, both Rob and Sandra exchange a couple of looks during that whole conversation, and then as they're finishing, as she leaves, they're kind of talking about how, boy, she just really jumped on that, and what Rob says is she's perceptive, but is her perception reality?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is where, of course, we get to the lie, and it's just one of those things that on a very superficial level, you can see why, if you don't interrogate it at all, it leads to what she's saying is like, if I'm going to dangle in front of them that I can tell them what kind of challenge it is, and that will be appealing. But in order to get that information, they have to agree. And then once they've agreed, then it's done. And then I get to tell them, and it will be a happy surprise. And no one will challenge it. But I think the key mistake she made was in saying that she would be the one to get to pick. Right? I do agree that was a key mistake. I have a different opinion on what the key mistake was, but go ahead, finish your thought. Because I feel like if what she said is, I have knowledge that would allow us to practice for the challenge, but the condition was that I have to fulfill a certain role in the challenge when we do it. That's the condition. And I'm not saying this is great, this would be better, but by phrasing it as, if I tell you, then I get to pick, and why wouldn't I pick to be the caller? But then they immediately start saying, well, so if you get to choose, why are you choosing to be that role? And it all immediately falls apart because there is no good answer to that question. And it just doesn't make sense on the face of it.
No, you're right, and you maybe have convinced me that was the more key. What I thought was the key issue was the idea that she was withholding the information mm-hmm. as part of like this, contingency that they needed to do what she wanted mm-hmm. when she actually didn't have that much information.
Yeah.
So I felt like that's where it fell apart to me. Although you've made a really good argument, and that I kind of buy into. But where it fell apart for me, just on the face of it, for the first time I watched it through, was as soon as they said, "Okay, we agree to do what you want. What is your information?" And she's like, oh, it's going to be a blindfolded challenge with a collar. And they're like, that's it? Like,
Right. Well,
and
and
there wasn't enough information to be worth, like, and so they
yeah,
start to question the veracity of the claim
yeah.
when there's not really any information,
Well,
you
and it
know?
just doesn't make any sense that way because as it ends up with the whole piece of like she gets to choose, except that it's sort of just a matter of it's like once they get to the challenge, and it's not totally what she said because what she said is I'm going to direct you all to go get them some things and then when you bring them back we're done. But they get there and there's also a puzzle.
Right.
And Probst does not tell them you have already selected your caller. He tells them, "Okay, who is it?" And they realize, who knows? Maybe they decided way before that. But at that point, they would have to just realize, "Oh, we don't actually have to pick her. So that means that the whole thing was BS to begin with, and we're going to pick whoever we want."
Well, and they were even given, I mean, the setup of how the challenge worked gave them almost, not necessarily an out, but almost like a testing phase for that, in that
Mm-hmm.
they didn't not select her as the caller. What they were asked to do first was say who sits.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like they could float this balloon
Right.
of, well, if we float the balloon of Nora sits, and then Probst comes back and said, I'm sorry, Nora can't sit.
Yeah.
You've already gone into this devil's bargain or whatever.
Right. Yeah,
then,
exactly.
Then we know that,
Yeah.
okay, then we have to do this.
Right. And see, ultimately, I think that that's where, and that's what, because I think that if it was presented by her, I don't, it could still fall apart at the challenge, but if it was presented as being able to practice for a challenge like this is significant. That's not nothing. That's real, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the ability for us to practice that is contingent on making this choice in advance. But the problem is that's going to already be a hard sell for everybody because that, first of all, they've never done anything like that before. And what are they going to do if she just spits it out and then, like, is it, like she could say, they told her, if she tells them, everyone will be forced to have her as the caller, regardless of whether that's what they want. So, like, she could have said that, and I don't know if they would have bought it. But the piece where she says, and if I tell you, then I get to choose, and they're immediately able to say, well, if we don't think you're the best caller, why would you still choose to be caller against what the rest of the tribe wants? That doesn't make sense anymore. The whole thing goes from being unusual to that's nonsense. And just like, and she was utterly unprepared for that line of questioning and had nothing as a response. So
yeah, her response was, I don't understand the question.
Well, I think it was really ultimately that she was legitimately taken completely off guard that they would not think she was a great choice for caller. I think she thought that she was the obvious choice for caller and that no one would have any objections.
Right. I mean, there was even the weird scene where they were like, she was like, well, it's already decided.
Mm-hmm.
And like, what do you mean it's already decided? I thought you got to pick. Yeah, like, there's only one role. It's the caller. Well, couldn't you choose to be a retriever? Well, I guess I could do that, but like, why would I do that? And it was just like, the whole thing is like, could just, like you said, it just blew her mind that like,
yeah, mm-hmm.
Because she was only seeing it in the, I should be the caller, I want to be the caller, I'm going to tell them I need to be the caller, and that's just, everybody's going to accept this.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone didn't accept it because no one wanted her to be the caller. So they were actually more challenging than they might have been in another situation.
Yeah. Well, and so,
you don't want to lose the challenge.
Yeah. Game theory comes up so often in discussions about Survivor, but one of those key elements that we've certainly mentioned before is that like one of the most fundamental failures that you can make in a game like this is neglecting to realize that the other player can make moves too.
Right.
It's not only a matter of you make a plan and then you either execute it or don't. The other player also has a plan. You know, you have to account for how someone else feels about a situation, not just whether you think it's good or not. And that, I think, is kind of what she's sometimes neglecting, right? Like, she's come up with a story that makes sense in her head when she's thinking about it, but she doesn't ever put herself in the shoes of the other person to try to say, okay, well, if someone came and told me this story, how would I react to them? It seems like she just didn't really do that.
Right.
So, in any event, as you mentioned, it was kind of fun being with Kelly as she's just delighted that Nora has trapped herself in such a terrible lie. It's just like, you know, she cannot blow up my spot because that would be admitting that she lied. So, you know, she can't take me down without making her own situation even worse, but it's already pretty bad. So, yeah, so I thought that was kind of fun. And it was interesting because they did try to practice a little bit, but we just get such an obvious demonstration of why everyone is immediately suspicious of her being caller, because she's not very good. She keeps saying, like, come to my voice, which makes sense in sort of that practice setup. But, you know, as Dan points out, like, that's not going to be how it is in the challenge, though. I'm going to be much further away. You're going to be behind me. You're going to have to be able to direct me to something that is further away from me, you than I am. Like, how are you going to direct me to it if you can't say, follow my voice?
Right. And again, that's just, again, I was pointing out, like, sort of her self-centeredness, like,
oh no, I agree.
And like, and even the whole point, like, she was, whatever they had decided was like the place that they were trying to direct Dan to, like, that was her initial instinct, was to walk over to the place and start saying, walk to me.
Yeah.
And they were like, you don't get to get off your perch. And so she would stand there and be like, well, okay, well, walk sort of towards my voice. And it's like, well, you can't use that.
Yeah.
Well, come towards me. No, forward for him. Put your mind where he is.
Yeah. Well, and it was just such a perfect illustration of exactly where her failings came from in this particular episode, is that, you know, she was really just struggling to be able to put herself in someone else's shoes, you know, and like everyone struggles with that to some extent, but it was just so heightened for her in this episode.
Yes.
And it's really kind of a shame for that tribe because, frankly, getting to practice something like that with the actual color you're going to use would be tremendously helpful. You just build a kind of shorthand in terms of how you're going to describe things, and you just get some practice. People moving around with the blindfold on, you know, it's like, that could actually be pretty helpful, I would think. But, you know, given that they presumably only actually practiced with her, who knows what they actually did. But in any event, though, they promptly decide to not only not choose her as caller, but to sit her out. And you might be right that they actually gamed that out, and just to say, we're going to see, because if they won't let us sit her out, that makes it obvious. But of course, that they would have found that out later anyway, right? You know, it's like they could have just not picked her as caller.
Yeah, but it gave them an early thing when you weren't under the, like, it was a decision that they only themselves had to make. Like, they weren't on the clock with the other team. Like, it was, and it was just such an easy thing. It'd be like, well, let's just find out. I mean, if we just sit her, like, then we don't have to argue about it.
But beyond even not choosing her, but having her sit out is such a perfect illustration of, we don't believe you. Like, Nora, we think you lied to us, and we're making a group decision to demonstrate that we do not value your input for this challenge because we don't believe your story.
Yes. Fortunately, they won.
Yeah.
For her, I guess.
Well, certainly, fortunately for her, she would have been in a rough spot, I think, if that tribe had lost.
Yes.
Um,
So,
yeah, and it was really actually interesting. I thought with this puzzle because we ended up with Vokai, with a significant lead, but then it turned out that it seemed like, oh no, they've just gotten stuck on this one last piece. It seems like, oh no, that's eating up the whole lead, and all of that was true. But then it's kind of revealed that, oh, there actually is kind of a trick to it, because the other tribe apparently made that same mistake. That Jason saw ahead of time and was struggling to try to correct, rather than saying it's done and then being told it was wrong.
right.
Yeah, and so I thought that was actually kind of interesting, just because it these puzzle finishes are so dramatic, but having it be down to, oh no, there is actually a kind of a difficult sort of trick to it. Like, it can almost fit together, but like the pieces will all fit together, but the pattern isn't quite right.
Right. It was a super clever puzzle, is
Yeah.
I think what you're getting at. Like the
Mm-hmm.
fact that, like you said, the whole thing can fit in the space
Yeah.
and be 95% correct is really tricky.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that
Well,
I don't know how you design that stuff, but that was a great design.
yeah.
So,
Well, and especially for a puzzle that's being solved like this, whereas the person manipulating the pieces is blindfolded and the caller has to stand back to some extent. So,
right.
yeah, makes it all the more difficult. But so in any event, Elizabeth took the loss really hard. Frankly, a lot harder than she should have, given how much of how much they came back. And even though they hadn't solved, they fell into the trap of that same difficulty. It was still very close. And considering, I think that she seemed like she was,
I mean, she's super competitive.
yeah.
I mean, that's what made her an Olympian,
Mm-hmm.
and she felt like she had tried to take this on her back, and it didn't work. And
Yeah.
they're underfed and stressed out, and
Mm-hmm.
it hit her. It seemed
Oh,
that's what it
yeah.
felt like to me.
No, I agree, but I'm just thinking about having not one, but two scenes where she talks about letting everybody down and them having to reassure her that it's not her fault.
Yeah.
Two separate scenes with two different groups of people makes me think it was pretty significant.
Yes.
But in any event, here's where we have, um, we had a bit where Chelsea said that Karishma is making herself an outsider. And I thought that was really interesting, because I was still kind of struggling with wondering how much of that was true and how much was just something else happening, right? How much of it was maybe the clique not, the mean girls not wanting to let the weird one in, so to speak, versus no, she's the one that goes and sits by herself at the other lunch table and doesn't try to talk to anybody.
Right.
If we want to use the high school lunchroom analogy, right? And it's just, it's one of those things where I think we can probably all identify with that struggle of, it can be hard to try to fit in where you don't feel like that it naturally clicks. But if you don't make the effort, it's how's what is the other people supposed to do, right?
Right.
It's not their fault that they didn't reach out to you if you didn't make yourself available. So I don't know. It's a dilemma. It's both things. I think is that she struggled to fit in, felt like she was struggling. That made her feel a little depressed, which made her withdraw more, which made it harder to fit in, and so on. Which I get all that, but it seems like it's not fixed. Yeah. But in the meantime, we have, let's see, Aaron and Missy talking with Elizabeth about Dean is kind of underperforming in challenges. He's part of a couple. Maybe they should get rid of him. But Elizabeth doesn't want to vote out Dean. She is more focused on feeling like Karishma doesn't contribute. She's not helping at camp like Dean does. And, and it's one thing to say, okay, yeah, power couple, fine, except that, is that really the phase of the game we are in right now where that's what's happening? Are Dean and Chelsea the ones who are dictating votes? Not really. So I could understand from Elizabeth's perspective why she doesn't necessarily see that as a reason to vote out someone she gets along with over someone she doesn't. Right?
Yep.
But so in the meantime, she goes to talk to Elaine, who agrees that Aaron's kind of shady. And they realize that, like, okay, they don't have the votes to take out Dean unless they, meaning Elizabeth and Elaine, help, because they won't want to tell Tom and Chelsea that they're going to do it. But here's where Elizabeth did something interesting that I think in some ways, other than being a good challenge competitor, I kind of felt like it was a below the radar first real survivor move from Elizabeth, because she was the one that had objections to voting out Dean, took it to Elaine, who agreed with her, and then what Elizabeth does is go back to Missy and say, Elaine doesn't want to do it.
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. So what you're doing is you're using Elaine as a shield to submarine this plan without taking the heat for being uncooperative.
Right.
And I thought that was interesting.
If they went to Elaine and said, "We heard you weren't on board with this," like Elaine would say, "Yeah, I'm having a little bit of hesitation." Like, so there's enough truth in it.
Yeah.
It's hard to, like, suss out,
Right. But it's definitely Elizabeth with a forethought, playing both sides carefully.
Yes.
And I thought that was pretty interesting, actually, even though it was not a moment that they shined a lot of light on, but it made me wonder if her game might be more sophisticated than I had been thinking it was so far.
So it did that for me, and then what solidified that was her eventual, like, agreement at the end, because so what we see later is that Missy comes and decides to float Chelsea instead of Dean. Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth is also initially, like, against that. And so she goes back to the people that she shares those things with and says, hey, like, I don't know, Missy's really starting to bother me with, like, she's just dying to, like, get somebody, like, one of them out. Mm-hmm. But what you can see is whatever reaction she got or whatever she felt with Missy, ultimately she decided it was still the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so it's not, she's doing a good job of floating, here's what I'm hearing, and here's kind of what
I lost you there.
Here's what I'm hearing, and here's what I'm thinking, and getting that feedback, and then making decisions based on it. Like, she's actually, I think she's doing that a little better than maybe we've seen. So,
yeah. I agree. I hadn't really felt like I had seen any evidence of it before this episode, but in this episode, although it's definitely still kind of below the radar, she does look like she's actually maybe doing a great job of spinning to everybody, oh, hey, I'm the person that's easy. I'll go along with whatever plan you've got. I'm a team player. But she's saying that to everybody, while in the meantime, she's actually feeding information from all sides to all the other sides, but still convincing each of them that, oh, but I'm with you. I'm not the one causing problems.
Right, and that's where, while genuine, her kind of, like, pseudo meltdown after the challenge almost, like, lends more credibility to this. Of, like, I mean, I'm just like, she doesn't say this, but there's sort of this like
Mm-hmm.
background of, I'm just so glad it's not me after that horrible performance that I had, that I'm willing to listen to whatever you have to say. Like, again, those aren't explicit words, but that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
how she's entering this. It's just like, yeah, oh,
Yeah.
you want to do that? Yeah, I mean, I want to do whatever you want to do, Missy. Like, it makes sense. Like, I'm good. And then she goes immediately to a confessional. It's like, I don't want to do that at all.
Right. So yeah, maybe it wasn't so much that she felt so bad about her own performance, and maybe what it was more of is, I want to try to feel out if anybody else thinks that was a problem.
Or it's one of those situations like, like we've talked about before, where like people decide the best strategy is the one they want to do.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it's exactly that, but it's like, these are my real feelings, is that I'm super frustrated about this.
Mm-hmm.
But also recognizing that like sharing this will like flush out whether anyone else thinks this way too.
Mm-hmm.
And there's almost like the combined thing, So
Yeah. So
anyway, yeah.
we'll see. Elizabeth is probably going to be around for a while, so we'll see how that develops. So let's see. We get to that brings us pretty much to the tribal council, right? So
Yeah.
we have Karishma talking about praying to the survivor gods, just that she feels like she hasn't seen any path that she can take that makes any difference, so she's just kind of hoping that everybody else kind of falls apart. Elaine talks about sort of being lost with all the activity. I thought it was interesting that Rob and Sandra's take on Elaine was that like she never knows what's going on, and I think that I feel like that's half true.
Yeah, I feel like that's the positioning makes. Like, I feel like that's
Yeah.
almost like a character she's playing.
Right. I think that that is partly true, right? Like, Elaine doesn't necessarily seem like she has a lot of proactive plans of her own, but she simultaneously feels pretty sharp to me in her ability to assess people.
Yeah. I think she's playing it up of like, oh, I'm just
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
dumb hick who doesn't understand what's going on. They all just moving too fast for me.
Yeah.
Like, I think she's using that to her advantage because she wants everyone to think that the game is moving too fast for her.
Yeah.
I think she's more clever than that. Yeah.
I agree that I think that's kind of my impression too. So let's see. We have both Dean and Chelsea agreeing that, yeah, Karishma should just, keep doing whatever she can. And I can't help but feel like it's oddly disingenuous for them to do that, given that they're pretty sure that Karishma is the one going home, right? So, for them to just kind of, in hindsight, what we know is the only people who expressed any level of support at all for Karishma were the people who were sure she was going home.
Right, which I thought was just an interesting like closure to what you were talking about, how the episode opened,
Mm-hmm.
and how, I mean, you didn't use the word bullying, but they were kind of like, hey,
Condescending.
but they reiterated that in tribal council.
Yeah.
Like, Missy even stepped back and said, hey, you do kind of suck. Like,
Yeah.
like, you don't do this, you don't do this, you don't do this. And so you staying here isn't maybe necessarily like you having done a good job or you being lucky. It's that we decided somebody else was a better threat. But, you need to maybe check yourself a little bit.
I thought that was interesting because, just this whole dynamic of, Missy versus Karishma, which, is a subplot that started last episode and was very confusing. In this episode, we get more information, but still does feel like maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, I think everyone can understand the feeling that someone on the outside has when, they don't fit in, they don't know what to do. But on the other hand, you could imagine the person who's on the inside looking at the person who's not making an effort and saying, all you're doing is complaining all day. What about that is supposed to be appealing to us? So like if you want to contribute something, then contribute something, and then we can have a conversation about whether that's worthwhile. But right now what you do is you sit at camp and complain.
Right.
You're getting lapped by better players than you, I thought was interesting. So it's kind of harsh, but also seems like it's coming from a place from Missy kind of feeling like I'm frankly getting kind of fed up for the fact that we can tell that in your head we're the bad guys for not being nicer to you, when it feels to us like you're not making any effort to contribute to anything, and yet feel like we should reward you just for being here.
Okay.
And so, which of those things is true? Probably somewhere in the middle. Although, as we said, like, it really seemed like the only people who defended her were the people who thought she was going home, which suggests that their defense of her was maybe not sincere, and therefore maybe it's pretty dramatic, right? It's not like there was disagreement and he had some allies but not others, and so who knows? Who can say? We'll see how it develops for Karishma, but right now she seems like she's stuck in the doldrums and has not yet demonstrated what she's going to be able to do to get out. I hope she does, but we'll have to see her do something more than she has so far. But in the meantime, I also did really like Missy's speech about how blindsides feel and being willing to call out something that I thought was really smart, which is to say, we're spending 24/7 with these people, and there are aspects of this situation where we're going through a shared stressful situation in close proximity, and in some ways that makes us feel like we're family, but in other ways, these are people that I have known for a week that I have no connection to except that we're all on this island together. In some ways we're like family, and others we're complete strangers. So is it any wonder that blindsides feel complicated? I thought that was really smart. Of course, it's also really smart in the second way, which is to say a bunch of nonsense that Probst will like that doesn't actually reveal what she intends to do. But then, of course, in the big irony, we get to have Chelsea's pre-voting last words be about how, well, I don't know, but I think blindsides are fun. I think they're fun. Blindsides are cool. And then...
Super cool.
Yeah, had no idea. Second person in a row to go out with an idol in her pocket.
Yep.
And that was the funny thing too, is that, just like in all of the various discussions about who to vote out, no one, like, idol talk really didn't even ever enter into it. But they did
That's
such
the
a
thing
good...
with, like, sometimes, like, it's like sort of the opposite of Yule, like people being too secretive about having idols, and now no one realizes that they're, like, actually around, and so they don't even think about them enough. But
yeah. So we have not had anyone who has found one play it yet. So unless you have found one, you don't know for sure that they are out there or not.
Correct.
Yeah. So we'll find out how things continue to develop. Next time we get some preview suggestion that there's tension between Dean and Missy. Who knows what that could possibly be about. But then, of course, we also get the promo that there's going to be a tribe mix-up. Which, we'll see how that goes, because who knows? It's, new deck, new shuffle, anything could happen. Maybe Karishma will get in with a group of people she feels like she gets along with better and starts to thrive. Who knows? But in the meantime, we'll be back for after the next episode of Survivor is on. So try to survive until then. But before I sign off, you may have noticed the overlay on the video today, which is all about Extra Life. And I just realized that on this particular, I don't have the link showing up on the screen, so I'm going to just briefly.
extra-life.org.
Yes, but also if.
Yeah.
Well, it's there, but also if you add to that /participant/ Christiana-Ellis, you can go directly to my campaign page. But I'm also going to, if you go to ChristianaEllis.com, there's links there. There's links all over. If you find me on social media, you're going to find links there. But on November 2nd and 3rd, I'm going to be running 24 hours of Dungeons and Dragons. And just like a marathon, I'm taking pledges to benefit children's hospitals as a part of the Extra Life charity. It's my 3rd year running doing this. Where we're raising money by playing some fun Dungeons and Dragons, and it's going to be great. You should check it out. It's a good cause, and so maybe chip in to help some children's hospitals, and then you can tune in on November 2nd and 3rd to watch me try to run 24 hours of Dungeons and Dragons in 2 days.
Yes, you will not see me there. I will actually be running an actual marathon.
Oh. An actual marathon, I see.
November 3rd. But I will contribute and support. So
wonderful.
Until then, good night. Everyone keep surviving. What do you say?
I said try to survive until then, but...
Try to survive until you already said that, yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. One of those things.